Esther knew how to work with powerful men. And because she knew how to do this, she herself was a very powerful woman. Hi YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me here to study Esther, one of my favorite books. Today I wanted to talk about Esthers Obedience. So I know that obedience is not the sexiest word in the world, but it is to me one of the keys of femininity. The ability to put aside one's pride and do what is necessary for the moment and pick your battles. This is something that Queen Vashti, as I said in my last video, did not know how to do. She did not know how to obey her husband in that moment and discuss with him whatever problems she may have had at a later time in a more strategic way. And what we'll notice with Esther in this and following videos is that Esther did understand this. She understood when she needed to just say, okay, I'm going to do as you've asked, and when to say, you know what, I need to stand up for myself, for my people, and this is how I'm going to do it in a strategic way that does not make an enemy out of the man. Okay, so let me pull up the specific scriptures that opened my eyes to this reality when it came to Esther. So Esther 2:10 says, Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. Again, in Esther 2:20, Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. So what these two scriptures reveal to me is that Esther had practiced from youth obeying a man that she trusts. The idea of trusting a man was not foreign to her. The idea of listening to his advice and taking it in and really implementing it into her life was not foreign, and it was not a threat to her. She had been used to it from young. She had been obeying Mordecai from young. And up to this point, of course, and throughout this story, Mordecai had never led her astray, and in many instances actually set her up for success. So she had practiced being able to trust a good man to advise her, and taking that advice and implementing it into her life and seeing the fruit of it. And this is something that's very difficult, I think, for the modern woman to accept, that there is a man or maybe a few men that you can trust whose advice you should take. And that obedience really is to your benefit, especially if this man is your husband. In my opinion, Queen Vashti did not at all have this view. She did not have this view that her husband calling her to a party was not to diminish her or to harm her or to trample her pride, but rather to put her on a pedestal, to allow people to praise her for just her gifts. She did not have that trust in her husband. Now, I'm not saying that you should have the same attitude to all men. Understand that Mordecai is somebody who took her in when she was an orphan. This is a man who is very selfless, and he dedicated his life to bringing her up right, to protecting her, and to steering her right in life. So he had shown the seeds of a man who would treat her well, who would not steer her wrong, and she was able to build that trust over time. So when he asked her not to do something like tell the king where she was from, that she was a Jew, she listened. You'll see in other videos and at the end of this story, from listening to Mordecai, she was actually able to gain leverage in protecting her people and herself. So that was the first thing that I learned about Esther's obedience. It really started from young. It was a practice. It was something she learned over time from dealing with a trustworthy man. I understand that unfortunately a lot of women have not had the opportunity to deal with trustworthy men. That does not mean that they don't exist, and that does not mean that you should not seek out the opportunity to be trusting when you see the fruit of a good man in front of you. You should look for the opportunity to trust. And I believe in so doing, you will start to cultivate that trust, that ability to obey without fear of being led astray. So the other area where I saw that Esther had this ability to obey, to trust the men that she found favor with, was with Haggai, who was the eunuch who oversaw all the women brought to the palace. Now immediately, Esther found favor with Haggai, and I'll read the scripture for you now. And the young woman, Esther, pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. That was Esther 2:9. So elsewhere, I read Esther 2:13 and 15. When the young women went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So there you go. I believe that the reason why she was able to win favor with Haggai, and the reason why she was able to win favor with the people, with everyone who saw her, was because she was able to humble her pride and look for advice. She did not go into the king thinking she knew what she could do to wow him, to seduce him. No, she looked for a man who knew the king better than she. And she said, "What's your advice?" And that is all the advice I will take. I will not add to it. I will not subtract to it. I will not go around the entire harem asking everybody else's opinion. I'm going to go to you because I trust you and I know that you have knowledge that I don't. That takes a tremendous amount of humility from any person, male or female, to know that you do not know. To ask yourself, well, who here knows more than I? Who can I humble myself under and take advice from so that I'm successful, so that I can win favor? This was one of the strengths to me of Esther's femininity. She knew what she did not know. She knew that she did not know everything, and she was able to take advice without fighting it, without bucking up against it. It is a strength for you to have that ability to identify who to trust, because oftentimes males are put into positions of power. Esther knew how to work with powerful men, and because she knew how to do this, she herself was a very powerful woman. So the culminating event, will she win the favor of the king? Well, let's read Esther 2:17 through 18. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. So now you probably see why I see King Xerxes as a very generous man. There was no reason he should have cut taxes and thrown a feast in Esther's name and given away gifts because he found a new wife. But this to me was not an evil man. This was a man who was generous and who was kind to his people. But anyways, that aside, as you can see, Esther won favor. I mean, more than favor, she won love. She won admiration. She won praise. She was put on a pedestal by one of the most powerful kings in the day. Why? Because she was willing to humble herself under the instruction of Haggai. That takes a lot, to trust a stranger, to trust someone who doesn't hold your beliefs, to trust somebody who, for all intents and purposes, you should be against, you should distrust. But Esther had practiced this from her youth with Mordecai, identifying a very good man of good character who treats her well and being able to humble herself under his instruction. This was not foreign to her. She understood the benefits of doing so, and she reaped the fruit of doing so. My message today really is consider the fact that obedience, the practice of trust, could actually be the key to one of your most powerful feminine traits. Obedience may actually lead to you being favored, to you being praised, to you being raised up. That is a tough message, but I encourage you to meditate on this and ask yourself, where am I just unnecessarily distrustful? And how and who with can I practice being obedient, being trusting? How do I identify who is worth that trust? So thank you so much again for joining me here on my channel, and I will see you next week. Until then, bye.